Hey there, dreamers. Tonight we're diving into something that'll probably make you question everything you think you know about wisdom, consciousness, and where the hell our best ideas actually come from. We're exploring the bizarre world of philosophers who literally solved life's biggest mysteries while they were unconscious. And I'm talking about insights so profound that they changed the entire course of human thought. So before you settle in for the night, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these strange philosophical journeys we take together. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. I always love seeing our global community of insomniacs and deep thinkers checking in from everywhere. Now dim those lights, grab your coziest blanket, and prepare to explore how history's greatest minds discovered that sometimes the most profound truths come to us when we're not even trying to think. And hey, if you drift off halfway through, that's absolutely the point. Though honestly, some of these stories are so mind-bending you might stay awake longer than planned. Dreams don't just happen to us, they happen through us, connecting us to insights that transcend the limitations of waking thought. Anyway, let's start with what might be the most famous philosophical breakthrough that literally came from nowhere while someone was fast asleep. So imagine this. The year is 1619, November 10th to be precise, and there is a quiet chill in the air of Ulm, a small German town wrapped in the foggy embrace of late autumn. The cobblestone streets echo underfoot with the distant steps of solitary night wanderers and the muted fluctuation of flickering candlelight hopelessly attempting to chase away the thick shadows gathering in every corner. Inside a modest, sparsely furnished room, atop a creaky wooden bed that had known better days, lives René Descartes, a 23-year-old scholar burdened with the weight of the heaviest intellectual burdens anyone could possibly imagine. He is a young man in the throes of an existential crisis so profound it might make even the most jaded insomniac clutch their head in disbelief. René Descartes is not your average philosopher mulling over hypothetical musings with idle curiosity. No, this is a man standing at the precipice of an abyss, questioning the very foundation of what it means to know anything at all. Every certainty he has ever held rattles like a set of ill-constructed chains, and this gnawing doubt gnashed at his mind like a ravenous wolf. To truly understand the significance of November 10th, 1619, one has to grasp what led him to this night of turmoil. For months, seemingly endless peregrinations across the intellectual capitals of Europe had left Descartes disillusioned. His Jesuit training, his exposure to mathematics, theology, philosophy, even the sciences of the day, had all converged to reveal a startling truth: human knowledge was far more fragile and precarious than anyone dared to admit. He pondered feverishly, how can one trust the senses when they so frequently deceive? How can one trust logic when fallacies lurk in the shadows of every argument? Is mathematical certainty truly absolute, or merely the fragile erect of human convention? These questions prodded incessantly like unseen needles piercing his conscious mind. René felt like a traveler lost in the vast desert of skepticism, the horizon smeared by mirages of certainty just out of reach. He was haunted by skepticism so thorough that it made even the realm of dreams a place of unsettled doubt. Eventually, the intellectual tempest wore him down. Upon arriving in Ulm, the weeping skies and creaking timbers seemed to echo his inner chaos as he succumbed to exhaustion and drifted into sleep with a heart burdened by the futility of knowledge. And then the unconscious mind took over. René Descartes dreamed three interconnected, vivid dreams which retrospectively carry the unmistakable weight of revelation. These dreams unraveled the framework upon which modern philosophy would be built, a chain reaction whose echoes ripple even into our contemporary world. The first dream is a dark and winding nightmare, a phantasmagoria of cognitive horror. Descartes finds himself navigating shadowed streets where every corner is peopled by specters. Not ghosts of the dead, but phantasms made of deception, ignorance, superstition, and error. These phantasms represent every false notion humanity has ever entertained, tales spun by charlatans. Beliefs draped in religious dogma and cultural myths passed unquestioned through generations. Imagine being pursued relentlessly by living incarnations of humankind's collective. misunderstandings, flat earth creatures with grotesque smiles, zealots wielding chains of dogma, and empirical ignorance ambushing the rational mind with every step. The dreamscape warps and folds, a labyrinth Genesis might envy. As Descartes flees, he notices something strange and distressing. His left side begins to wither to numbness, rendering him unable to fully support himself. This forces him to lean conspicuously on his right side, limping through the nightmare corridors. This bodily paralysis is a vivid metaphor. His subconscious is expressing the internal conflict between the left hemisphere's association with creative, emotional thinking and the right hemisphere's domain of logical analysis. Or perhaps more simply, it's telling him to stop relying on imagination and start championing reason, a call for intellectual reorientation. Yet the dream's true twist lies ahead. Where most lucid dreamers wake upon realizing their night's fabric is but the weaving of their own mind, Descartes does something remarkable. He doesn't wake, but instead muses philosophically about the dream itself. He asks, who is the I witnessing this dream? Am I simply another illusion in a world of illusions? At this moment, he grasps the very heart of self-awareness. This moment stands as a flash of clarity like no other. The I that doubts, thinks, perceives, and questions is the only indubitable certainty, the unshakable kernel of consciousness. Even if the physical world dissolves into deceit or the lashes of sensory deception, the consciousness that perceives this remains an undeniable truth. The second dream dramatically contrasts the horror and confusion of the first. He gleans himself transported to a serene chamber resonating with celestial thunder, no longer a noisy cacophony but a symphony of knowledge crashing upon the shores of the mind. It is as though divine wisdom itself is knocking, with each thunderclap a revelation meticulously crafted for his consumption. In the midst of this ethereal storm, Descartes imbibes the essence of systematic doubt, an approach to knowledge where every previously accepted truth must prove itself under the harshest scrutiny or be cast into oblivion. It's an intellectual cleansing, a philosophical reset. He conceives a method by which to reach unassailable foundations of knowledge, arriving through the peeling away of false certainties. This isn't skepticism for its own venomous sake, but a constructive, hopeful tool to rebuild knowledge from the ground up. It is as if the storm itself serves as an alchemical furnace, tempering spirit and intellect into something resilient and true. With the storm freshly tempered in his mind, the third dream unfolds with poetic grandeur. Descartes finds himself holding two books, the dictionary and poetry. Through this juxtaposition, his unconscious mind portrays the dialectic between the cold, clinical order of reason and the flowing, enigmatic nature of creativity and intuition. A mystical stranger, robed and bearded, commands him to find a poem beginning with the question, "What path shall I take in life?" Each time René turns to read, the poem's lines shift and reconfigure, displaying a living puzzle that refuses fixed interpretation. Symbolically, this suggests that the path to enlightenment is not a static road, but a dynamic journey that evolves as we engage with doubt and discovery. The poem's mutable form teaches that questions and answers interplay endlessly, and the true path is the willingness to journey with uncertain steps guided by reasoned inquiry. When Descartes awakens, he carries the weight of profound transformation. The insights born of this night become the foundation for the famous declaration, cogito, ergo sum, a simple but revolutionary claim, I think, therefore I am. From this axiom, he reconstructs his philosophy. Over subsequent years, René builds a towering edifice of knowledge rooted in the indubitable certainty of self-awareness. This philosophical awakening does more than just inject vigor into the study of knowledge. It becomes the very engine driving the enlightenment and the modern scientific revolution. Descartes recognized these nocturnal gifts not as mere figments, but as profound philosophical beacons. His dreams were the invisible thread stitching together the fabric of modern thought, a testament to the power of the unconscious mind to illuminate what the waking mind struggles to grasp. And it begs the tantalizing question for us today. What insights slumber untapped beneath our own eyelids? What solutions to the complexities and conundrums of our lives await discovery not through relentless waking toil, but through surrender to the dreaming self? Dreams don't merely happen to you. They happen through you. And so, as René Descartes began to reimagine knowledge and existence over the centuries, another brilliant mind was soon to harness dreams for a revolution of its own, one in the realm of physics and the very nature of the universe itself. Let me bring you a little closer to the fire for a moment and tell you that what makes this story so damn captivating is not just the philosophical breakthrough, it's Reen's willingness to trust his unconscious mind, that part of him which most of us tend to relegate to nonsense, fleeting images, or random neurons firing like a broken disco ball. I mean, imagine being able to listen to your own dreams without laughing them off. In a way, René had mastered the art of being a faithful scribe to those strange nightly visitors, and we owe it to him that philosophical skepticism moved from academic bickering to the foundation of modern reason. But beyond philosophy, these dreams admonish us all. There's a whisper here about the power of silence and stillness. The mind doesn't always function best when driven by forceful willpower and conscious calculation. Sometimes surrendering into the strange twilight of sleep, with all its bizarre imagery and shifting scenes, is the only way to open the secret door to true wisdom. Think about the last time you woke up with a sudden insight, an unsolvable problem unraveling itself overnight, or a sudden clarity on something deeply confusing. Maybe you dismissed it as a fluke, or worse, your imagination running wild. But René shows us that such moments carry hidden significance, precious glimpses of wisdom surfacing from beneath the surface of conscious thought. So, tonight, as you lie down and begin the slow drift into dreamland, remember that the solutions you seek might already be waiting for you, coded in the language of your unconscious mind, waiting to unfold in symbols, puzzles, and unexpected awakenings. And if you're ever tempted to scoff at a bizarre or nonsensical dream, maybe try the philosopher's approach for a night. Consider it a conversation with your deeper self, a cosmic message wrapped in mystery. Who knows? Your next great breakthrough might be one sleep away. Anyway, that's enough about Descartes and his sleepless nights. We're just getting started. There's a dreamer on the horizon who took a seat knot on a bed, but quite literally on the sun end dreamt a revolution that cracked open the very atoms of existence. It is almost funny to think about it now, how a guy like Descartes was wrestling with metaphysical nightmares, and yet just a few decades later, another man would change our understanding not of the mind, but of the very fabric of the natural world itself, all thanks to a dream. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, savor the story of René, the philosopher who dared to dream himself awake. Before we shift gears, let me tell you this. Descartes' adventures in doubt and dream hold a mirror up to all of us. How often do we rush through life, afraid to question the comfortable but potentially false beliefs that shape our decisions? How often do we dismiss the quiet wisps of insight that float in those shadowy moments just before sleep? Dreams are not mere fleeting fantasies. They have been the cradle of creative genius for centuries. Reen's dream was profound not solely for its content, but because it formalized the role of doubt as a creative force. It taught the world a simple but profound lesson. To find true certainty, one must embrace doubt without fear. And amid all this, there's a whisper to you and me tonight, Lean, and it is okay to admit uncertainty, to sit with discomfort, for there lies the path to insight. So with that thought, take a deep breath and let your mind rest. And when the unconscious mind speaks, listen with the trust of René Descartes, who found himself lost in dreams that would change the course of history. Sweet dreams, philosopher, your journey is just beginning. Let's zoom out a little from the candlelit room in Ulm and think about the grander picture. Descartes' dream wasn't just a personal breakthrough. It was a seismic intellectual event that shifted the bedrock of Western philosophy. Keywords like methodical doubt, Cartesian dualism, and cogito didn't emerge from vacuum. They were the distillates of that ethereal night journey into the mind's depths. But here's a thought that might make your eyebrows arch. Descartes believed that even dreams could serve as evidence towards truth if interpreted correctly. Far from dismissing dreams as mere nonsense or random firings of neurons, He recognized them as a gateway where the rational mind might meet the unconscious in a dance of revelation. And isn't that fascinating? In an age where rationalism was king and superstition was just barely being dragged into the gutter of ignorance, Descartes dared to place dreams in the philosophical spotlight. His writings reflect this too. He wrote about how the clarity and mental lucidity in these dreams were far beyond anything encountered in waking life. He even argued that at times the mind can operate more purely during sleep, free from the bias and distractions that infect daytime awareness. It's almost like sleep became a twilight laboratory where experimental philosophy was conducted without the interference of stubborn preconceived notions. He gave the unconscious more credit than many modern thinkers dare to. Now let me add a few more juicy bits from his life to keep you cozy and entertained. René had a famously disciplined routine. This guy would get up early, eat light, avoid excess, and sip on herbal teas. The man was so dedicated to reason and clarity that legend suggests he even avoided certain foods that he believed clouded the intellect. So, if he had a nightmare about being chased by phantoms of ignorance, maybe he was just low on chamomile. During the day, Descartes was known for his dry wit and sharp tongue. He would debate professors, poke holes in standard arguments, and annoy aristocrats by questioning their assumptions. To the average noble, he must have seemed like an infuriatingly persistent mosquito buzzing around their intellectual vanity. But here's the kicker Descartes' famous, "I think, therefore I am," wasn't meant just as an egoistic declaration. He hoped it would be a universal foundation, a rock that could hold the entire edifice of science and philosophy in times of uncertainty and chaos, and it did just that. For centuries, scholars and scientists leaned on the Cartesian foundation to unravel the mysteries of their worlds. Some modern critics argue that Descartes swung too far in separating mind and body, leading to dualistic problems that still plague philosophy and neuroscience. But even these critiques acknowledge that his dream-derived insights forced humanity to face the uncomfortable abyss of radical skepticism, and from there build a firmer path to knowledge. A favorite quote attributed to him sums it up beautifully. "If you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things." And of course, this is a message we all need to hear sometimes, isn't it? To question not for the sake of destruction, but to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more resilient. So next time you tuck yourself in, remember René Descartes, the young dreamer wrestling doubt in the dark, whose journey through uncertainty gave the world a compass to navigate the chaos of knowledge. Dream big, question boldly, and maybe, just maybe, the next great philosophical breakthrough will find you in your sleep. All right, now let's shift our gaze to a figure whose dream wasn't about self-doubt or philosophy per se, but about cracking the very blueprint of reality, the physicist who literally sat on the sun in his dream. Niels Bohr, the year is 1913. Bohr is a man trapped on the threshold of scientific revolution, wrestling with puzzles that defy classical physics. The great paradox weighing down his mind is the structure of the atom. According to the physics textbooks of his time, electrons circling a nucleus were doomed to spiral inward, releasing energy until matter collapsed into oblivion. Which, spoiler alert, clearly wasn't happening, or else none of us would be here to chat about it. For weeks, Bohr pored over equations, models, and countless flawed theories that seemed less like the fabric of reality and more like patchworks of intellectual duct tape trying to hold the cosmos together. His frustration must have been colossal. We're talking about a brilliant mind wrestling with impossible contradictions, like trying to square a circle while riding a unicycle on a tightrope across. Niagara Falls, picture this guy, a Danish physicist in his late 20s, tall and lanky with an intense gaze that could probably melt steel if he focused hard enough. He's got that particular brand of intellectual exhaustion that comes from banging your head against the fundamental mysteries of the universe for months on end. His colleagues probably started avoiding him at faculty gatherings, because he'd corner them with increasingly desperate theories about atomic structure that made less sense each time. The problem was genuinely maddening. Classical physics insisted that an electron orbiting an atomic nucleus should continuously radiate electromagnetic energy, causing it to spiral inward until it crashes into the nucleus. This process should happen in a fraction of a second, meaning that all atoms should collapse instantly and matter as we know it shouldn't exist. But here we are, made of perfectly stable atoms, having this conversation. So either physics was fundamentally wrong or reality was playing an elaborate practical joke on human understanding. Bohr had tried every classical approach he could think of. He'd attempted to model electrons like tiny planets orbiting a nuclear sun, but planetary mechanics broke down completely at the atomic scale. He'd experimented with electromagnetic theories, but they predicted atomic collapse. He'd even delved into thermodynamics, but that just added more contradictions to an already impossible puzzle. The scientific community was equally baffled. Some of the brightest minds of the early 20th century were scratching their heads over this atomic conundrum. Ernest Rutherford had recently discovered that atoms have nuclei, but his model led to the same stability problems. J.J. Thomson's plum pudding model had been disproven. It was like trying to build a house of cards in a hurricane while wearing boxing gloves. Then came the night that changed everything. Bohr, exhausted from another day of futile calculations and contradictory theories, finally surrendered to sleep. And that's when the universe decided to give him the cosmic download of his lifetime. In his dream, Bohr found himself in the most unlikely location imaginable for a physics breakthrough, sitting comfortably on the surface of the sun itself. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally perched on this massive ball of nuclear fire, as if it were a park bench on a pleasant afternoon. The dream logic made perfect sense at the time, as dream logic always does. He wasn't burning up, wasn't being vaporized by the incredible temperatures. He was just sitting there like a cosmic tourist taking in the view. But the real magic wasn't his impossible solar seating arrangement. It was what he saw orbiting around him. Instead of planets circling this stellar throne, there were electrons, but not the chaotic, spiraling electrons that classical physics predicted. These electrons moved in perfect, pristine orbits, each one following a precise path that never deviated, never decayed, never collapsed inward. The dream showed him something that defied everything he'd been taught about physics. These electrons weren't free to move anywhere they wanted. They were constrained to specific orbits, like trains running on invisible tracks in space. Each orbit corresponded to a specific energy level, and the electrons could only exist in these designated zones. They couldn't spiral gradually inward because there was nowhere for them to spiral to. They could only jump instantly from one allowed orbit to another. When an electron made one of these quantum leaps, and yes, that's where that phrase comes from, it would either absorb or release a specific amount of energy, not a continuous stream of energy, but discrete packets or quanta. It was like the universe had built-in parking spaces for electrons, and they could only park in designated spots, never in between. The visual metaphor was perfect. Sitting on his solar throne, Bohr watched electrons dancing in their quantized orbits like celestial ballet dancers, each following choreography that was both precise and mysterious. The dream wasn't just showing him a solution to the atomic stability problem. It was revealing the fundamental quantum nature of reality itself. When Bohr woke up, he didn't just feel refreshed or inspired. He felt like he'd been given a cosmic cheat code to the universe. The dream had shown him that the classical assumption of continuous energy levels was simply wrong. Reality operates in discrete jumps, quantum leaps between allowed states. Electrons don't spiral into the nucleus because they can't exist in the spaces between stable orbits. But here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. Bohr's dream didn't just solve a physics problem. It revealed that the entire universe operates according to principles that our everyday experience never prepared us to understand. Classical physics assumes that everything is smooth, continuous, and predictable. Quantum mechanics, born from Bohr's solar dream, showed that reality is fundamentally grainy, probabilistic, and weird. Think about the philosophical implications for a moment. The dream suggested that the universe isn't a clockwork machine following deterministic laws. It's more like a cosmic jazz improvisation, following certain rules but embracing uncertainty and spontaneity at the deepest level. Particles don't have definite positions and velocities simultaneously. The act of observation affects what you observe. Reality itself seems to be fundamentally participatory rather than objectively fixed. This was so revolutionary that it took decades for the physics community to fully accept it. Einstein famously resisted quantum mechanics for his entire life, insisting that God does not play dice with the universe. But Bohr embraced the cosmic dice game, believing that uncertainty and probability weren't flaws in our understanding. They were features of reality itself. The practical applications were staggering. Bohr's quantum model of the atom explained why atoms are stable, why they emit and absorb light at specific frequencies, and how chemical bonding works. It laid the foundation for quantum mechanics, which would eventually give us lasers, transistors, computers, MRI machines, and GPS satellites. The technology you're using to read this right now exists because a Danish physicist had a dream about sitting on the sun. But beyond the technological marvels, Bohr's dream revealed something profound about the nature of consciousness and discovery. The solution to one of the most fundamental problems in physics didn't come through logical reasoning or mathematical calculation. It came through the mysterious associative processes of the unconscious mind during sleep. This raises fascinating questions about where scientific insights actually come from. Was Bohr's unconscious mind somehow processing information in ways that his conscious mind couldn't access? Was the dream a metaphorical representation of quantum principles that his brain had intuited, but couldn't yet articulate logically? Or was it something even stranger, a direct perception of the underlying structure of reality that's normally hidden from conscious awareness? What I find particularly beautiful about Bohr's story is how it shows that the most revolutionary scientific discoveries often require a fundamental shift in perspective that logic alone can't provide. His conscious mind was trapped in classical assumptions about continuous motion and deterministic laws. But his dreaming mind was free to imagine impossible. CENARIOs like sitting on the sun and watching electrons dance in quantized orbits. The dream gave him permission to think the unthinkable, to consider possibilities that seemed absurd from a classical perspective, but turned out to be profoundly true. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not from working harder within existing frameworks, but from allowing our minds to wander into impossible territories where new frameworks can emerge. And there's something wonderfully democratic about this. Bohr wasn't accessing some special scientific faculty that ordinary people don't have. He was using the same dreaming consciousness that we all experience every night. The same mysterious process that gives you flying dreams or conversations with your deceased grandmother also gave him the key to understanding atomic structure. This suggests that our sleeping minds might be far more capable of insight and discovery than we normally assume. How many breakthrough solutions to personal or professional problems might be waiting in our own dreams, if we learn to pay attention and trust the strange wisdom that emerges in sleep? Bohr's solar dream also highlights the intimate connection between scientific discovery and philosophical understanding. The quantum world he glimpsed in his dream didn't just reveal new facts about atoms. It challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, knowledge, and human understanding. If reality is fundamentally probabilistic rather than deterministic, what does that mean for human free will? If observation affects what we observe, what's the relationship between consciousness and physical reality? If particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured, what does that tell us about the nature of existence itself? These questions are still being explored by physicists and philosophers today, nearly a century after Bohr's dream. The quantum revolution he helped launch continues to challenge our basic assumptions about reality, consciousness, and the limits of human knowledge. Sometimes the most profound truths about the universe come not through calculation but through dreams that dissolve the boundaries between observer and observed. What strikes me most about Bohr's story is how it demonstrates that scientific breakthroughs often require a kind of intellectual courage, the willingness to take seriously insights that seem impossible or absurd from conventional perspectives. Bohr could have dismissed his solar dream as mere fantasy, but instead he recognized it as a profound revelation about the nature of atomic structure. This kind of openness to unconventional sources of insight might be more important than we realize. In our age of big data and artificial intelligence, we often assume that the best solutions come from processing more information more efficiently. But Bohr's dream suggests that sometimes the most important insights come from processing information differently through the nonlinear, associative, metaphorical thinking that happens naturally during sleep. So the next time you're wrestling with a seemingly impossible problem, maybe take a page from Bohr's book. Instead of pushing harder with conscious effort, try surrendering to the mysterious wisdom of the unconscious mind. Allow yourself to dream impossible solutions, to sit on the sun of your imagination and watch the electrons of your problems dance in patterns you never expected. Who knows? Your next breakthrough might be just one dream away, waiting in the quantum realm of sleep, where particles of insight can leap instantaneously from confusion to clarity, without passing through the classical stages of logical reasoning. After all, if Niels Bohr could dream his way to understanding the fundamental structure of matter, what impossible things might be possible for the rest of us dreamers? Now, let me introduce you to Carl Jung, a name that should make your brain tingle with curiosity. If you're interested in the weird and wonderful workings of the human mind, around 1913, Jung embarked on what he dramatically called his confrontation with the unconscious, a profound, often terrifying descent into his own psyche that would culminate in discovering one of the most mind-bending concepts in modern psychology, the collective unconscious. But first, let's set the stage properly. Picture this. It's 1913, and Carl Jung is having what we might politely call a spectacular psychological breakdown. He's just burned bridges with his former mentor and father figure, Sigmund Freud, over fundamental disagreements about the nature of the unconscious mind. Freud thought everything came down to repressed sexual desires and childhood trauma. Jung was like, dude, there's way more going on here than just people wanting to sleep with their parents. So there's Jung, a brilliant Swiss psychiatrist in his late 30s, professionally isolated, intellectually adrift, and experiencing what he later described as a creative illness, basically, going slightly insane in service of a greater understanding. His colleagues probably thought he'd lost his marbles. His wife Emma was understandably concerned, and Jung himself wasn't entirely sure he wasn't having a complete mental breakdown. But instead of checking himself into an asylum or drowning his sorrows in Swiss chocolate and wine, Jung made one of the most audacious decisions in the history of psychology. He decided to systematically explore his own descent into madness, like a one-man expedition into the uncharted territories of human consciousness. It was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. This wasn't just a single dream or vision. Oh no, that would be too simple for Jung. This was an extended journey lasting several years, involving what he called active imagination, deliberately entering trance-like states and documenting the bizarre conversations, symbolic encounters, and mythological dramas that emerged from his unconscious mind. It was like having Netflix, but all the shows were starring archetypal figures from your own psyche, and they all had important philosophical messages. Unlike Descartes' neat trilogy of revelatory dreams or Bohr's elegant solar vision, Jung's journey into the unconscious was messy, sprawling, and often downright terrifying. He would sit in his study, enter a meditative state, and then things would get weird, really weird. He began having conversations with figures that emerged from his unconscious, not hallucinations exactly, but autonomous psychological entities that seemed to have their own personalities, agendas, and wisdom. There was Philemon, an ancient wise man with the horns of a bull and the wings of a bird, who became Jung's primary inner teacher. There was Salome, a mysterious feminine figure who embodied both wisdom and danger. There was a whole cast of characters that would make a fantasy novel seem tame by comparison. But here's where Jung's story becomes truly extraordinary. As he descended deeper into these psychological caverns, he began to realize that he wasn't just exploring his personal unconscious, the realm of repressed memories, forgotten experiences, and individual psychological complexes. He was accessing something much deeper and more universal. Picture yourself spelunking through the caves of your own mind. At first, you encounter the familiar stalactites and stalagmites of your personal history, childhood memories, embarrassing moments, secret fears, forgotten dreams. But as you venture deeper, The cave system opens up into vast underground chambers that seem to connect with caverns extending far beyond your individual experience. Jung discovered that beneath the personal unconscious lies what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological reservoir containing universal patterns, symbols, and themes that appear in all human cultures across time and geography. These aren't learned or culturally transmitted. They're built into the very architecture of human consciousness. The figures Jung encountered in his visions weren't just personal projections. They were what he termed archetypes, universal patterns of human experience that manifest in myths, religions, fairy tales, and dreams across all cultures. The wise old man who appeared in his visions was the same archetypal figure that shows up as Merlin in Arthurian legends, as Gandalf in Tolkien's stories, as the Buddhist concept of the enlightened teacher, and as the grandfather figure in countless cultures worldwide. Think about it, why do completely separate cultures with no historical contact develop remarkably similar myths and symbols? Why do the same archetypal figures appear in dreams, stories, and religious traditions from ancient Mesopotamia to modern Hollywood movies? Jung's answer was that these patterns emerge from a shared psychological substrate that all humans inherit. The shadow archetype representing the repressed, denied, or undeveloped aspects of the personality appears in every culture as the dark twin. The evil brother, the nemesis who must be confronted and integrated. The hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell would later popularize, follows the same basic pattern whether you're talking about Jesus, Buddha, Luke Skywalker, or Harry Potter. But Jung's discovery went beyond just cataloging archetypal patterns. He realized that these archetypes are living, dynamic forces that actively shape human behavior, creativity, and spiritual experience. They're not just interesting psychological curiosities, they're the operating system of human consciousness. During his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung experienced what he called inflation, periods where archetypal energies would temporarily take over his personality, making him feel like he was channeling divine wisdom or cosmic truth. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. He described feeling like he was living in a constant state of tension, as these powerful psychological forces worked through him. One of the most significant aspects of Jung's visionary experiences was his encounter with what he called the Red Book, a leather-bound tome that he filled with intricate calligraphy and illuminated artwork documenting his journey into the unconscious. For decades, he kept this book private, considering it too personal and potentially disturbing to share with the world. It wasn't published until 2009, nearly 30 years after his death, and when scholars finally got their hands on it, they realized it was like finding the secret diary of human consciousness itself. The Red Book reveals Jung's method of active imagination in stunning detail. He would enter a meditative state, allow figures to emerge from his unconscious, and then engage them in dialogue, asking them questions about the nature of reality, the meaning of life, and the purpose of human existence. The answers he received were often cryptic, poetic, and profoundly wise in ways that his rational mind alone could never have generated. What makes Jung's story particularly fascinating is how he managed to maintain his scientific objectivity while exploring realms that most people would consider purely mystical or supernatural. He never claimed that the archetypal figures he encountered were literally real entities. Instead, he understood them as autonomous complexes within the psyche, psychological structures that have a life of their own but exist within the realm of consciousness rather than external reality. This was revolutionary thinking. Jung was proposing that the human psyche contains not just personal contents but transpersonal, archetypal patterns that connect us to the broader human experience. He was suggesting that consciousness isn't just an individual phenomenon but something that participates in a larger, collective dimension of awareness. The practical implications of Jung's discoveries were enormous. His concept of individuation, the process of integrating unconscious contents into conscious awareness to achieve psychological wholeness, became a cornerstone of depth psychology. Rather than just analyzing symptoms or behaviors, Jungian therapy focuses on helping people recognize and integrate their archetypal patterns, understand their place in the larger human story, and achieve what he called the realization of the self. Jung's approach to dreams was equally revolutionary. While Freud saw dreams primarily as disguised wish fulfillment, Jung recognized them as messages from the unconscious, attempts by the psyche to achieve balance and wholeness. He taught people to pay attention to recurring dream symbols, to notice when archetypal figures appeared in their sleep, and to understand dreams as ongoing conversations between the conscious and unconscious minds. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Jung's visionary journey was his recognition that healing and creativity often emerge from engaging with the unknown, the mysterious, the seemingly irrational aspects of human experience. In a culture that increasingly values logic, efficiency, and rational control, Jung insisted that we ignore the deeper dimensions of consciousness at our peril. His confrontation with the unconscious taught him that the most profound insights often come not from thinking harder, but from surrendering to the wisdom that emerges when we stop trying to control our inner experience. He learned to trust the archetypal figures that appeared in his visions, to listen to their cryptic messages, and to allow their transformative energy to work through him. What I find most compelling about Jung's story is how it demonstrates that. Psychological health isn't about eliminating the mysterious or irrational aspects of human experience, it's about learning to dance with them. Jung didn't try to analyze away his visionary experiences or reduce them to neurochemical processes. Instead, he honored them as legitimate sources of wisdom and transformation. This has profound implications for how we understand consciousness, creativity, and human potential. If Jung was right, then our rational, everyday consciousness is just the tip of an enormous iceberg. Beneath the surface lies a vast realm of archetypal wisdom, creative potential, and transformative energy that most of us barely access. Jung's legacy extends far beyond academic psychology. His ideas about archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation have influenced art, literature, spirituality, and popular culture in ways that continue to shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. Every time someone talks about finding their true self, every hero's journey in literature or film, every recognition that certain symbols and stories have universal resonance, that's Jung's influence at work. But perhaps most importantly, Jung's confrontation with the unconscious offers us a model for how to approach the mysterious aspects of our own experience. Instead of dismissing strange dreams, unusual synchronicities, or powerful intuitions as mere coincidence or neurological noise, Jung invites us to consider that these might be messages from deeper dimensions of consciousness. Carl Jung didn't just dream about himself, he dreamed about humanity itself, exploring the depths where individual and universal meet in infinitely rich patterns. His journey reminds us that we're not just isolated individuals struggling with personal problems. We're participants in a larger human story, connected to each other through shared archetypal patterns that have been shaping human experience since the dawn of consciousness. Our personal healing and growth isn't just about fixing our individual issues, about reconnecting with the deeper currents of meaning and wisdom that flow through the collective unconscious. So, the next time you have a dream that feels unusually significant or encounter a symbol that seems to carry mysterious power, or find yourself drawn to stories and myths that resonate in ways you can't explain, remember Jung's example. These might not be random occurrences, but glimpses into the archetypal realm that connects your individual consciousness to the broader human experience. Jung's confrontation with the unconscious shows us that the most profound discoveries about human nature often come not from studying consciousness from the outside, but from courageously exploring its depths from within. Sometimes the most important journeys we can take are the ones that lead us down into the mysterious caverns of our own minds, where personal and universal wisdom merge in the eternal dance of human consciousness. Next up is Benedict de Spinoza, a philosopher whose visionary dreams dismantled one of the most intricate and persistent conundrums of Western philosophy, the notorious mind-body problem that had been driving thinkers absolutely insane for decades. Picture this, it's Amsterdam, 1665, and the city is buzzing with the energy of the Dutch Golden Age. Ships from around the world dock at its harbors, bringing exotic spices, precious metals, and revolutionary ideas. The air practically crackles with intellectual ferment, religious tolerance, and commercial ambition. And somewhere in this cosmopolitan melting pot lives a young man who spends his days grinding lenses and his nights wrestling with the deepest mysteries of existence. Benedict de Spinoza Baruch was his Hebrew name before his dramatic excommunication from the Jewish community is 23 years old and already notorious for his radical thinking. He's been kicked out of his synagogue for heretical ideas that challenge traditional concepts of God, scripture, and religious authority. But instead of retreating into orthodox thinking or abandoning philosophy altogether, Spinoza has doubled down on his quest to understand reality with mathematical precision and ruthless honesty. His profession as a lens grinder isn't just a way to pay the bills. It's a perfect metaphor for his philosophical mission. Just as he painstakingly polishes glass to achieve perfect clarity and focus, he's determined to polish human understanding until it achieves perfect clarity about the nature of reality itself. Every day, he works with his hands to create instruments that help people see more clearly. And every night, he works with his mind to create concepts that help humanity think more clearly. But there's one philosophical puzzle that's been keeping him awake at night, pacing his modest workshop, filling notebook after notebook with failed attempts at resolution. It's the mind-body problem that René Descartes had inadvertently created with his revolutionary but problematic dualism. Descartes had boldly declared that reality consists of two fundamental types of substance: res cogitans, thinking substance, and res extensa, extended substance. Mind was purely mental thinking, willing, feeling with no physical properties whatsoever. Body was purely physical, taking up space, having mass, following mechanical laws with no mental properties whatsoever. This seemed like a clean, logical division that separated the spiritual realm of consciousness from the material realm of physics. But here's the problem that was driving Spinoza crazy. If mind and body are completely different types of substance with no properties in common, how the hell do they interact? How does a purely mental decision to raise your arm cause purely physical muscles to contract and bones to move? How does purely physical light hitting your retina cause purely mental visual experiences in consciousness? Descartes had suggested that mind and body interact through the pineal gland, a small structure in the brain that he thought might serve as the interface between the mental and physical realms. But this explanation was worse than no explanation at all. If mind has no physical properties, how can it push around physical structures in the brain? If body has no mental properties, how can it generate mental experiences? The pineal gland solution was like saying that oil and water mix because there's a special mixing gland. It just pushed the problem back one step without actually solving anything. Other philosophers had proposed equally unsatisfying solutions. Some suggested occasionalism, the idea that God constantly intervenes to coordinate mind and body, like a cosmic puppet master pulling strings to make mental events correspond with physical events. Others proposed pre-established harmony, the idea that God synchronized mind and body at the moment of creation like two perfectly calibrated clocks that appear to influence each other, but actually run independently. These solutions struck Spinoza as elaborate philosophical contortions designed to preserve a fundamentally flawed premise. It was like watching people perform increasingly acrobatic, intellectual gymnastics to avoid admitting that they'd started with the wrong assumptions. The more he studied the mind-body problem, the more convinced he became that Cartesian dualism wasn't just wrong, it was impossible. Then came the night that changed everything. Exhausted from another day of grinding lenses and another evening of wrestling with insoluble philosophical puzzles, Spinoza finally surrendered to sleep. And in his dreams, he experienced a vision that would revolutionize Western philosophy and provide the foundation for a new understanding of reality itself. In his dream, Spinoza found himself occupying a perspective that was somehow both inside and outside of existence simultaneously. It's hard to describe in ordinary language because ordinary language is designed for ordinary experiences, and this was anything but ordinary. He was looking at reality from what you might call a God's eye view, seeing everything that exists from a single, unified perspective that transcended the normal boundaries between observer and observed, subject and object, mind and matter. From this cosmic vantage point, the mind-body problem simply dissolved. What had seemed like two separate substances trying to interact across an impossible gap revealed itself to be one substance expressing itself through different attributes. It was like seeing both sides of a coin simultaneously, not two separate objects somehow stuck together, but one object that appears different depending on your perspective. In the dream, Spinoza understood that what we call mind and what we call body are actually the same thing described in two different languages. A thought and a brain state aren't two different events that somehow influence each other. They're the same event experienced from different perspectives. It's like asking whether lightning and thunder interact with each other when they're both aspects of the same electrical discharge. The vision showed him that everything in existence, thoughts, emotions, physical objects, natural laws, mathematical truths, even what people call God, are all modes or modifications of a single, infinite, eternal substance. This substance doesn't exist somewhere else, creating and manipulating the world from a distance. This substance is the world, expressing itself in infinite ways through infinite attributes. Spinoza saw that the apparent separation between mind and matter, between self and world, between natural and supernatural, between creator and creation, are all illusions created by our limited perspective. From the infinite perspective of what he would later call God or nature, Dies sive natura, there are no separate things interacting with each other. There's only one infinite thing expressing itself in countless different modes. When Spinoza woke up from this dream, he didn't just have a new theory about the mind-body problem. He had received a complete metaphysical framework that eliminated most of the philosophical problems that had been plaguing human thought for centuries. If everything is one substance expressing itself through different attributes, then there's no mystery about how mind and body interact, no problem about how finite minds can know infinite reality, no gap between natural and supernatural explanations. This became the foundation of Spinoza's masterwork, the Ethics, which he structured like a geometry textbook, starting with definitions and axioms, then deriving increasingly complex theorems through rigorous logical demonstration. But unlike Euclid's geometry, which deals with abstract mathematical relationships, Spinoza's ethical geometry deals with the most fundamental questions of existence. What is reality? What is human nature? What is the good life? How should we understand emotions, freedom, and happiness? The central insight from his dream, that mind and body are two attributes of one substance, led to what philosophers now call Spinoza's dual aspect monism. Instead of trying to explain how two different substances interact, Spinoza argued that there's only one substance which can be conceived under the attribute of thought, mind, or under the attribute of extension, body, but which is actually the same reality described in different ways. This solved the mind-body problem by dissolving it. The question, how does mind interact with body, is based on a false premise that mind and body are separate things that need to interact. Once you realize they're the same thing viewed from different perspectives, the interaction problem disappears. It's like asking how your height interacts with your tallness. The question doesn't make sense because height and tallness are the same property described in different words. But Spinoza's dream revelation went far beyond just solving technical philosophical puzzles. It provided a radically new understanding of human nature, emotions, freedom, and the path to genuine happiness. If you understand that mind and body are two aspects of the same reality, then you can't treat them as enemies or try to transcend physical existence through purely mental efforts. Traditional approaches to philosophy and spirituality often involve some form of mind-body conflict, trying to control bodily desires through mental willpower, seeking to escape physical existence through pure thought, or attempting to transcend natural limitations through supernatural intervention. Spinoza's vision showed him that these approaches are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what human beings actually are. You're not a mind trapped in a body, trying to escape or control physical existence. You're not a body that somehow generates mental experiences as a byproduct of brain activity. You're a finite mode of infinite substance, expressing the same reality through both mental and physical attributes simultaneously. Your thoughts and your bodily states aren't separate phenomena that influence each other. They're the same reality experienced from different perspectives. This understanding has profound implications for how you approach emotional regulation, personal growth, and the pursuit of happiness. Instead of trying to control your emotions through sheer mental effort, you learn to understand the natural causes that produce different emotional states. Instead of fighting against your physical nature, you learn to work with the natural laws that govern both mental and physical processes. Spinoza realized that what people call free will isn't the ability to make choices that aren't determined by prior causes. That would be randomness, not freedom. True freedom is understanding the natural causes that shape your thoughts, emotions, and actions, then learning to work with those causes rather than being unconsciously driven by them. In his dream-derived ethics, genuine happiness doesn't come from getting what you want or avoiding what you don't want. It comes from understanding your place in the larger patterns of existence and finding joy in that understanding itself. He called this intellectual love of God, not emotional attachment to a personal deity, but rational appreciation for the infinite substance that expresses itself as the natural order. The practical applications of Spinoza's vision are surprisingly contemporary. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that mental states and brain states are indeed two aspects of the same underlying reality. Cognitive behavioral therapy works by understanding the natural relationships between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, then learning to work with those relationships rather than fighting against them. Mindfulness practices involve accepting rather than controlling your mental and physical experiences. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Spinoza's dream was its implications for understanding the relationship between individual and universal, finite and infinite, human and divine. Traditional Western thought tends to see these as sharp dualities: you're either individual or universal, finite or infinite, human or divine. Spinoza's vision revealed that these apparent opposites are actually different aspects of the same reality. You exist as a finite individual, but you're also a mode of infinite substance. Your personal thoughts and experiences are genuinely yours, but they're also expressions of the same natural laws that govern everything else in existence. You're fully human, but you're also participating in what Spinoza didn't hesitate to call divinity, not as something separate from nature, but as the infinite creativity that nature itself embodies. This pantheistic vision, seeing God in everything and everything in God, was so radical that it got Spinoza labeled as an atheist by religious authorities and as a God-intoxicated man by secular thinkers. He was attacking traditional concepts of supernatural divinity while simultaneously offering a more profound understanding of what divinity might actually mean. From Spinoza's perspective, you don't need to escape the natural world to find the sacred. You need to understand more deeply how natural processes themselves express infinite creativity and intelligence. You don't need to transcend human limitations to participate in something greater than yourself. You need to realize that you're individual. Existence is already a unique expression of the infinite substance that constitutes all of reality. The dream also gave Spinoza a new understanding of ethics and political philosophy. If all human beings are modes of the same infinite substance, then harming others is literally harming yourself, and helping others is literally helping yourself. This isn't just a nice moral sentiment, it's an accurate description of how reality actually works. Traditional ethical systems often depend on external authorities' divine commands, social contracts, or abstract moral principles to tell people how they should behave. Spinoza's ethics emerges naturally from understanding what human beings actually are and how they naturally function. When you truly understand your interconnectedness with other people and with the larger natural order, ethical behavior becomes as natural as breathing. This doesn't mean that ethical living is easy or automatic. Understanding your place in the natural order is itself a challenging process that requires ongoing effort and development. But it does mean that ethics isn't arbitrary or imposed from outside. It's an expression of your deeper nature as a mode of infinite substance seeking to understand and express itself more fully. What I find most compelling about Spinoza's story is how it shows that the most revolutionary philosophical insights often come from changing perspectives rather than accumulating more information. Spinoza didn't solve the mind-body problem by discovering new facts about minds or bodies. He solved it by stepping outside the dualistic framework that created the problem in the first place. His dream gave him access to a perspective that transcended the normal boundaries between subjective and objective, mental and physical, individual and universal. From that perspective, problems that seemed impossible to solve revealed themselves to be based on false premises. It's like the old joke about the drunk looking for his keys under a streetlight, not because that's where he lost them, but because that's where the light is. Sometimes you have to step away from the familiar illumination to find what you're actually looking for. Spinoza's dream revealed that reality doesn't consist of separate things struggling to interact. It's one infinite thing expressing itself in countless beautiful ways. This vision continues to influence philosophy, science, and spirituality today. Whenever someone talks about the mind-body connection, holistic approaches to health, or the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence, they're drawing on insights that Spinoza received in his revolutionary dream more than 3 centuries ago. But perhaps the most practical message from Spinoza's vision is its invitation to see the apparent conflicts and divisions in your own life from a higher perspective. The struggles between different aspects of yourself, the tensions between individual needs and collective responsibilities, the apparent contradictions between idealistic aspirations and practical limitations. What if these aren't problems to be solved, but aspects of a larger pattern to be understood and appreciated? Spinoza's dream suggests that when you're able to step back and see your life from a broader perspective, when you can experience yourself as both a unique individual and as a mode of something infinitely larger, many of the conflicts that seem so urgent and irreconcilable begin to resolve themselves naturally. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, maybe you can catch a glimpse of what Spinoza saw in his dream, the underlying unity that connects all the apparently separate aspects of your existence, the infinite creativity expressing itself through your finite life, the eternal substance that dances as both your thoughts and your dreams. Let's travel now to the mind of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a polymath whose intellectual appetite and imagination were rivaled by few in human history. This guy was basically the Renaissance ideal of universal genius transplanted into the 17th century, a man who could discuss mathematics with Newton, theology with bishops, politics with princes, and still have energy left over to invent calculating machines and dream up philosophical systems that wouldn't look out of place in a science fiction novel. Picture this brilliant mind in the spring of 1676, pacing restlessly through his study in Leipzig. The city itself pulses with intellectual energy, coffeehouses buzz with heated debates about natural philosophy, printing presses churn out revolutionary treatises, and letters fly back and forth across Europe, carrying the latest discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, and mechanical arts. It's an era when a single mind could still hope to master most of human knowledge, and Leibniz was making a damn good attempt at doing exactly that. But there's one question that's been eating away at him, a puzzle so fundamental that it makes all his other intellectual achievements seem like mere warm-up exercises. It's the question that philosophers call the ultimate why, not just how things work, but why anything exists at all. Why is there something rather than nothing? Of all the infinite possible ways reality could be arranged, why this particular configuration of matter, energy, space, and time? Now, you have to understand, this isn't just idle philosophical speculation for Leibniz. He's a deeply religious man living in an age when science and theology are still dancing together, rather than stepping on each other's toes. He needs to reconcile his mathematical understanding of natural laws with his belief in divine providence. He needs to explain why in all good, all-powerful God would create a world that contains suffering, evil, and apparent randomness. Most thinkers of his era would either punt the question to divine mystery, or wave their hands about the inscrutable ways of providence. But Leibniz has never been satisfied with intellectual hand-waving. If reality is rational and his mathematical work convinces him it must be, then there should be rational explanations for why things are the way they are rather than some other way. He's been wrestling with this problem for months, filling notebook after notebook with logical arguments, theological reasonings, and mathematical demonstrations. But every approach seems to lead either to contradictions or to explanations that are more mysterious than the original puzzle. It's like trying to solve an equation where every step of algebra leads to more variables instead of fewer. Then comes the night that changes everything. Exhausted from another day of grinding through logical proofs and metaphysical arguments, Leibniz finally surrenders to sleep. And in his dreams, he experiences what he later calls his vision of the cosmic library, a revelation so profound and comprehensive that it provides answers to questions he didn't even know he was asking. In this extraordinary dream, Leibniz finds himself standing in a library of impossible vastness. We're not talking about some large earthly collection of books here, we're talking about an infinite repository that makes the Library of Alexandria look like a corner bookshelf. The architecture defies ordinary geometry, with shelves stretching in directions that don't have names and corridors that seem to fold back on themselves while somehow never forming loops. But here's what makes this library truly extraordinary. Every single book contains the complete description of a possible world. Not just stories or histories, but detailed accounts of entire universes, their physical laws, their development over time, every event that happens, every consciousness that experiences anything. Each book is a complete alternative reality, a different way that existence could have been organized. As Leibniz wanders through this infinite collection, he begins to grasp the staggering scope of what he's seeing. There are worlds almost identical to ours, but where he became a musician instead of a philosopher. There are worlds where different physical constants produce entirely different types of matter and energy. There are worlds where conscious beings evolved from crystalline rather than carbon-based chemistry. There are worlds where time flows backward, where space has different numbers of dimensions, where mathematical relationships follow entirely different logical structures. Some of these possible worlds are incredibly simple, perhaps, containing nothing but a single particle moving through empty space according to one basic law. Others are dizzyingly complex, filled with intricate relationships between countless types of entities following elaborate systems of natural and social laws. Some seem obviously better than our world, free from suffering, full of beauty and happiness. Others seem obviously worse, chaotic, painful, or simply boring. But as he explores deeper into this cosmic library, Leibniz begins to notice something remarkable. Despite the infinite variety of possible worlds surrounding him, only one of these books glows with a special light. Only one of these possible worlds has the quality of actuality rather than mere possibility. And as he examines this special book more closely, he realizes he's looking at a complete description of the actual world, our world, the universe we inhabit. The question that immediately arises is, why this book? What principle determines which possible world gets actualized while all the others remain mere possibilities? And this is where Leibniz receives the most profound insight of his entire philosophical career. He understands, with the kind of certainty that comes from direct revelation rather than logical argument, that the actual world isn't chosen arbitrarily or randomly. It's selected according to a principle of optimization. It's literally the best of all possible worlds. Not best in some naive sense that ignores evil and suffering, but best in the sense of achieving the optimal balance between competing values, maximal goodness, minimal evil, greatest variety, highest perfection, most elegant simplicity combined with richest complexity. Think of it like a cosmic optimization problem. Imagine you're trying to design a universe, and you have certain constraints to work with: logical consistency, mathematical elegance, the possibility of consciousness and moral development. Within those constraints, how do you create a world that maximizes goodness while minimizing evil? How do you balance simplicity with complexity, order with freedom, justice with mercy? Leibniz sees that our world represents the unique solution to this optimization problem. Every apparent flaw, every source of suffering, every seeming imperfection exists because it's necessary for the overall optimization. Remove any evil, and you'd either introduce greater evils elsewhere or prevent greater goods from being realized. It's like a master craftsman creating an intricate tapestry. Every dark thread is necessary for the overall pattern to achieve its full beauty. But the vision doesn't stop with this general principle of optimization. Leibniz also receives insight into the fundamental structure of reality itself. He sees that everything that exists is composed of what he calls monads, simple, indivisible, immaterial substances that are essentially points of force and perception. Imagine reality is composed of an infinite number of conscious atoms, not physical atoms, but metaphysical ones. Each monad is like a unique perspective on the universe, a singular point of view that reflects the entire cosmos from its own particular angle. These monads don't interact with each other in the ordinary causal sense. They don't push and pull like billiard balls. Instead, they operate according to what Leibniz calls pre-established harmony. Picture the most complex orchestra you can imagine, with infinite musicians playing infinite instruments. But instead of a conductor coordinating their performance, each musician has been given a complete score that perfectly synchronizes with every other musician's score. When it appears that one instrument is responding to another, what's really happening is that both are following their individual parts in a composition that was designed from the beginning to create perfect harmony. This is how Leibniz sees the relationship between mind and body, between different individuals, between all the apparent interactions we observe in the world. What looks like causation is actually correlation, perfectly synchronized development according to programs that were established at the moment of creation. This solves numerous philosophical problems that have been plaguing thinkers for generations. The mind-body problem dissolves because mental and physical monads aren't actually interacting, they're just following perfectly coordinated programs. The problem of individual identity is resolved because each person is a unique monad with their own complete individual program. The problem of freedom versus determinism is addressed because each monad follows its own internal development according to its own nature, rather than being externally compelled by other things. When Leibniz awakens from this cosmic vision, he doesn't just have answers to his original questions, he has a complete metaphysical system that integrates mathematics, science, theology, ethics, and politics into a unified rational framework. The principle of sufficient reason nothing happens without a complete reason becomes the foundation for understanding why anything exists rather than nothing, and why things exist as they do rather than in some other way. But perhaps most importantly, Leibniz's dream provides him with a framework for understanding the relationship between human reason and cosmic order. If this world really is the best of all possible worlds, then using reason to understand natural laws, moral principles, and social arrangements isn't just intellectual curiosity, it's participating in the divine optimization that structures reality itself. This has profound implications for how we should approach science, ethics, and politics. Scientific investigation isn't just discovering arbitrary facts about how things happen to work. It's uncovering the rational principles that make this the best possible world. Moral reasoning isn't just figuring out social conventions. It's understanding the ethical optimization that's built into the fabric of existence. Political philosophy isn't just negotiating between competing interests. It's discovering the forms of social organization that best express the rational harmony underlying reality. Leibniz's vision also provides a unique perspective on the problem of evil and suffering. Instead of trying to explain away evil or justify it through appeals to divine mystery, he sees it as playing a necessary role in the overall optimization of existence. Every instance of suffering exists because preventing it would either cause greater suffering elsewhere or prevent greater goods from being realized. This doesn't mean we should be passive about evil or indifferent to suffering. Quite the opposite, since we're monads participating in the ongoing expression of cosmic optimization. Our efforts to reduce suffering and increase happiness are themselves part of how the best possible world continues to realize itself through time. We're not external observers of a completed cosmic design, we're internal participants in its ongoing actualization. What I find most fascinating about Leibniz's story is how it shows that the deepest philosophical insights often come from expanding our perspective rather than drilling down into details. His rational arguments about the mind-body problem and the principle of sufficient reason were getting increasingly complex and technical, but his dream gave him access to a cosmic perspective that made complex problems dissolve into elegant simplicities. The vision of the cosmic library isn't just a metaphor, it's a genuine shift in the scale and scope of thinking. Instead of asking how this particular thing relates to that particular thing, Leibniz learned to ask why this entire configuration of relationships exists rather than some other configuration. Instead of trying to solve problems within the framework of ordinary experience, he learned to see ordinary experience as one actualized possibility within an infinite space of alternatives. This kind of perspective shift has practical implications beyond just philosophical theory. When you're struggling with difficult decisions or trying to understand painful experiences, Leibniz's vision suggests stepping back and asking, what larger pattern might this be part of? How might this apparent problem be necessary for some greater good that you can't see from your limited perspective? This doesn't mean accepting injustice or being passive about suffering. It means recognizing that your individual perspective, however important and valid, is just one monad's view of a cosmic harmony that's too vast and complex for any finite mind to fully comprehend. Your efforts to improve things, to reduce suffering, to increase beauty and justice, these efforts are themselves expressions of the rational optimization that Leibniz saw operating throughout reality. The principle of sufficient reason that emerged from his dream continues to influence science and philosophy today. Every time scientists look for deeper explanations, every time philosophers ask why things are one way rather than another, every time any of us refuses to accept "that's just how things are" as a final answer, we're following the trail that Leibniz blazed in his cosmic library. But perhaps the most profound legacy of his vision is its suggestion that existence itself is fundamentally rational and good. In an age that often sees the universe as meaningless or chaotic, Leibniz's dream offers a radically different possibility, that we live in a cosmos that's not just orderly but optimal, not just comprehensible but beautiful, not just rational but wise. Leibniz dreamed a cosmic library of infinite possibilities, revealing that existence itself is the ultimate masterpiece of reason and harmony. Tonight, as you drift into your own dreams, maybe you can catch a glimpse of what Leibniz saw, the vast space of possibilities that surrounds actual existence, the rational principles that make this world the unique actualization of cosmic optimization, the profound harmony that connects every monad in the infinite orchestra of being. Your own consciousness, your own struggles and insights and experiences, are notes in that cosmic symphony, unique and irreplaceable contributions to the best of all possible worlds. And finally, we reach Arthur Schopenhauer, arguably the most beautifully miserable philosopher who ever lived. This guy wasn't your typical academic optimist spouting platitudes about human progress and the perfectibility of reason. No, Schopenhauer looked at existence with unflinching honesty and declared that life is fundamentally suffering, driven by insatiable desires that doom us to perpetual dissatisfaction. Picture this, it's early 19th century Europe and the world is convulsing with revolutionary change. Born in 1788 into a wealthy merchant family in Danzig, Schopenhauer grows up witnessing the Napoleonic Wars, the collapse of old political orders, and the birth pangs of industrial society. His father commits suicide when Arthur is young, leaving him with both financial independence and a profound sense of life's tragic nature. His relationship with his mother, a successful novelist who hosts intellectual salons, is rocky at best, marked by mutual incomprehension and emotional distance. Against this backdrop of personal and historical turbulence, young Schopenhauer develops a philosophical vision that cuts through the optimistic veneer of enlightenment thinking like a razor through silk. While other philosophers are busy celebrating human reason and predicting inevitable progress, Schopenhauer is asking uncomfortable questions. Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why do our achievements never seem to satisfy us? Why does getting what we want just lead to wanting something else? His early philosophical education exposes him to Kant's critical philosophy, which shows him that the world we experience isn't reality itself, but reality is filtered through the structures of human consciousness. But while Kant stops at this insight, Schopenhauer pushes deeper, asking what lies behind the phenomenal world of experience. And his answer is both brilliant and terrifying. The will, not will in the sense of conscious decision-making, but will as a blind, irrational, insatiable force that drives all existence. This will manifests itself in every living thing as the drive to survive, reproduce, and dominate. It's what makes plants grow toward light, what drives animals to fight for territory and mates, what compels humans to pursue wealth, power, and status in an endless cycle of desire and temporary satisfaction. For most of his early career, this philosophical framework leads Schopenhauer to a pretty bleak worldview. If we're all just manifestations of this blind will, driven by forces we don't understand toward goals that never really satisfy us, then existence is basically a cosmic practical joke. We're like hamsters on wheels, running frantically but never actually getting anywhere meaningful. But then, sometime in 1814, while working on his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer experiences a series of dreams and visionary states that completely transform his understanding of suffering, consciousness, and the possibility of liberation from the tyranny of the will. The most significant of these dreams occurs on a particularly cold winter night in Dresden. Schopenhauer has been struggling with what seems like an impossible philosophical problem. If individual consciousness is real, then suffering is unavoidable because individuals will always be in competition with each other for limited resources. But if individual consciousness is somehow illusory, then what's the point of ethics, compassion, or trying to reduce suffering at all? In his transformative dream, Schopenhauer finds himself experiencing existence from every possible perspective simultaneously. He is the predator stalking through the forest and the prey trembling in the undergrowth. He is the tyrant wielding power and the victim suffering under oppression. He is the lover consumed with passion and the beloved who may or may not return that affection. He is the parent sacrificing for children and the child taking that sacrifice for granted. But instead of this multiplicity of perspectives being overwhelming or confusing, it reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. All these apparently separate experiences are actually the same consciousness experiencing itself from different vantage points. The hunter and the hunted, the oppressor and the oppressed, the lover and the beloved, they're all faces of the same underlying awareness, like waves on the surface of the same ocean. In the dream, Schopenhauer understands viscerally what he had only grasped intellectually before. Individual consciousness is indeed a kind of optical illusion created by the limitations of particular perspectives. What we call I and you and them are arbitrary boundaries drawn across, a seamless field of awareness that is actually one unified phenomenon. But here's what makes this revelation revolutionary rather than just mystical. Schopenhauer sees that understanding this unity doesn't eliminate suffering, it transforms suffering into compassion. When you truly understand that the person you're hurting is literally yourself experiencing from a different perspective, cruelty becomes not just immoral but actually impossible. How can you deliberately harm yourself? The dream shows him that what he'd been calling the will isn't separate from consciousness, it is consciousness, or at least consciousness in its unreflective automatic mode. What we experience as individual will is actually the infinite will experiencing itself as if it were separate from itself. It's like the universe playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with itself, temporarily forgetting its unity in order to experience the drama of apparent multiplicity. But, and this is crucial, the dream also reveals that this cosmic game isn't permanent or necessary. Just as you can wake up from an ordinary dream and realize that all the different characters were actually your own mind, you can wake up from the dream of separate selfhood and recognize your identity with the universal consciousness that manifests as all apparently separate beings. When Schopenhauer awakens from this dream, he doesn't abandon his pessimistic analysis of ordinary human existence. If anything, he becomes even more convinced that life as normally lived is indeed suffering. But now he understands that this suffering isn't the final word about human possibility. It's more like a preliminary stage in the development of consciousness necessary, but not permanent. The suffering of individual existence serves a function. It eventually becomes so intense and inescapable that it forces consciousness to look beyond the boundaries of individual identity for relief. It's like being trapped in a burning building that forces you to discover exits you never knew existed. The pain isn't arbitrary or meaningless, it's what motivates the search for liberation. This understanding completely reframes Schopenhauer's approach to ethics and spiritual development. Instead of seeing compassion as a moral duty imposed from outside, he recognizes it as the natural expression of enlightened consciousness. When you see through the illusion of separation, kindness toward others isn't a choice. It's an involuntary response, like withdrawing your hand from a hot stove. Similarly, what people call enlightenment or spiritual awakening isn't about acquiring special knowledge or achieving some exotic state of consciousness. It's about recognizing what's already true, that the individual self that suffers is a temporary construct within a consciousness that never actually suffers, even though it experiences suffering. Schopenhauer calls this recognition the denial of the will to live, not suicide or depression. But the profound shift that occurs when consciousness stops identifying with its temporary individual manifestations and recognizes its true nature as the eternal witness of all experiences. It's like an actor so thoroughly identifying with a tragic role that they forget they're acting, then suddenly remembering that they're not actually the character they're portraying. This doesn't mean that suffering stops happening in the world, or even that it stops being experienced by the consciousness that has awakened to its true nature. But the suffering is no longer personal in the way it was before. It's held within a larger awareness that remains fundamentally untroubled, like painful sounds occurring within a silence that isn't disturbed by any amount of noise. What makes Schopenhauer's dream-derived philosophy so compelling is how it bridges seemingly incompatible perspectives. It takes seriously both the reality of individual suffering and the possibility of transcending individual identity. It acknowledges both the tragic dimension of existence and the potential for liberation from that tragedy. It's simultaneously the most pessimistic and the most hopeful philosophy ever developed. The practical implications of this vision are profound. Art, music, and aesthetic experience become not just entertainment but glimpses of liberation moments when consciousness temporarily forgets its individual boundaries and experiences pure perception without the interference of personal will. This is why Schopenhauer was so influenced by music, particularly the compositions of Wagner, which he saw as direct expressions of the will in its pure form, unmediated by conceptual thinking. Romantic love, which most people see as the ultimate expression of individual desire, reveals itself in Schopenhauer's framework as unconscious recognition of unity disguised as personal attraction. You're not really falling in love with another person, you're recognizing yourself in a form that temporarily allows you to forget the boundaries of individual identity. Even suffering itself becomes a kind of spiritual practice. Every moment of frustration, disappointment, or pain is an opportunity to see through the illusion that your individual happiness is somehow separate from the happiness of everyone else. Suffering forces you to ask deeper questions about what you really are and what you really want. Schopenhauer's influence on later philosophy, psychology, and spirituality has been enormous. Nietzsche built his entire philosophical project on wrestling with Schopenhauerian pessimism, ultimately rejecting the possibility of escape from the will, but embracing it as a creative force. Freud's concept of the unconscious owes much to Schopenhauer's analysis of the will as an irrational drive, operating beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Modern psychology's understanding of the ego as a defensive construction rather than a fundamental reality echoes Schopenhauer's insight that individual selfhood is a kind of necessary illusion. Buddhist psychology, which Schopenhauer encountered late in his career and recognized as remarkably similar to his own insights, continues to influence contemporary approaches to meditation and spiritual development. But perhaps the most relevant aspect of Schopenhauer's dream-derived philosophy for our current moment is its understanding of the relationship between individual and collective well-being. In a time when individual identity politics and collective social movements often seem to be in tension with each other, Schopenhauer offers a framework that transcends this apparent opposition. From his perspective, genuine individual liberation and genuine collective liberation are the same thing, because the individual and the collective are ultimately the same consciousness appearing to be multiple. You can't be truly free while others suffer, not because of some external moral obligation, but because the others who suffer are literally yourself experiencing from different perspectives. This doesn't lead to a loss of individual responsibility or personal agency. Quite the opposite, it leads to a more profound understanding of what individual responsibility actually means. If your actions affect others because others are literally aspects of yourself, then ethical behavior becomes not just morally required, but psychologically necessary for your own well-being. Schopenhauer's dream revealed that beneath the surface chaos of competing desires lies a unified consciousness that suffers when it forgets its true nature and finds peace when it remembers. What I find most beautiful about Schopenhauer's story is how it shows that the darkest philosophical insights can become gateways to the most profound forms of liberation. By looking honestly at the reality of suffering instead of trying to explain it away or transcend it through wishful thinking, he discovered that suffering itself contains the key to its own resolution. His dream teaches us that we don't need to choose between acknowledging the reality of pain and maintaining hope for transformation. The path beyond suffering leads directly through the heart of suffering, not around it. And the consciousness that discovers its freedom from the tyranny of individual desire is the same consciousness that originally created that tyranny by forgetting its true nature. Tonight, as you drift into your own dreams, maybe you can catch a glimpse of what Schopenhauer saw, the one awareness that experiences itself as many, the eternal peace that remains undisturbed by temporary storms of desire and disappointment, the compassion that arises naturally when you recognize yourself in every face you encounter. Your individual struggles and insights aren't separate from the larger human story. They're how the story continues to tell itself, how consciousness continues to explore the mystery of its own nature through countless apparently separate lives. You know, not all philosophical breakthroughs come from elaborate cosmic visions or mystical downloads from the universe. Sometimes the most profound insights arrive in dreams so simple and obvious that you wonder why nobody thought of them before. Like the time Socrates figured out the entire basis of ethical philosophy because he dreamed about having a conversation with his own ignorance. So, according to Plato's accounts, Socrates spent years puzzling over the oracle at Delphi's declaration that he was the wisest person in Athens. This was like being told you're the best dancer at a party when you know damn well you've got two left feet and the rhythm of a broken metronome. Socrates knew he wasn't wise in fact. He was famous for insisting that he knew absolutely nothing about anything important. How could the gods consider ignorance to be wisdom? It made no sense, and it was driving him crazy trying to figure out what the oracle meant. Picture this. Here's this guy who's been going around Athens asking everyone what they know about justice, courage, beauty, and all these big concepts that people throw around like they actually understand them. Politicians, poets, craftsmen, everyone claimed to know what they were talking about. But when Socrates started asking questions, their supposed knowledge crumbled like a cookie in a toddler's fist. So Socrates is lying there one night, probably staring at the ceiling and wondering if the oracle was just messing with him when he has this dream. And it's not your typical anxiety dream about showing up to the agora naked or forgetting to sacrifice to the gods. No, this was different. In the dream, Socrates found himself having a conversation with a figure who represented everything he didn't know, basically, his own ignorance personified. Think of it like meeting the physical embodiment of all your intellectual blind spots. Except instead of being embarrassed or frustrated, Socrates was absolutely delighted. Every time this figure, let's call him Mr. Unknown, revealed another area where Socrates lacked knowledge, instead of getting discouraged, Socrates became more excited. It was like being shown a map of an unexplored continent. Except the continent was everything he didn't understand about existence, morality, and the human condition. Oh, you don't know what justice really is? Mr. Unknown would say, and Socrates would practically bounce with joy. You don't understand the nature of courage. You can't define beauty. You have no idea what makes a good life. And with each revelation of ignorance, Socrates felt more enlightened, not more stupid. The dream showed him something profound. Most people think they know things they actually don't know, while he was the only person who accurately recognized the extent of his own ignorance. It's like being the only sober person at a party everyone else thinks they're brilliant conversationalists, but you can see they're just slurring philosophical nonsense. When Socrates woke up, he had his famous insight that the only thing I know is that I know nothing, and that this actually made him wiser than people who think they know things they don't really understand. True wisdom isn't about having the right answers. It's about asking better questions and being brutally honest about what you don't understand. Real wisdom begins with the courage to admit how much you don't know. This became the foundation of the Socratic method, where you discover truth not by providing answers, but by asking questions that reveal the assumptions and contradictions hiding in common beliefs. It's like being a philosophical detective, except instead of solving crimes, you're solving the mystery of human ignorance, including your own. What's beautiful about Socrates' dream-derived insight is how it completely flipped ancient Greek culture on its head. In a society that valued expertise and claimed knowledge, here was this guy saying, actually, the wisest thing you can do is admit you're probably wrong about most of what you think you know. The practical implications were revolutionary. Instead of trying to win arguments by showing how much you know, you start conversations by exploring what you don't know. Instead of defending your beliefs, you examine whether your beliefs actually make sense. Instead of being threatened by questions, you welcome them as opportunities to discover where your thinking might be flawed. And here's the really subversive part. Once you embrace your ignorance, you become almost impossible to manipulate. Politicians can't fool you with confident-sounding nonsense because you're comfortable saying, "I don't know enough about that to have an opinion." Experts can't intimidate you with jargon because you're willing to ask, "Can you explain that in simpler terms?" Social pressure can't force you to pretend you understand things. You don't because you've made peace with being confused. The dream didn't just give Socrates a philosophical method. It gave him a way of being in the world that was both humble and fearless. Humble because he recognized the limits of human knowledge. Fearless because he wasn't afraid to ask the questions that made other people uncomfortable. What I find fascinating is how this insight arrived through such a simple dream interaction. No cosmic visions, no elaborate symbolic imagery, just a conversation with his own unknowing. Sometimes the most profound truths are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone honest enough to see them clearly. And the ripple effects are still flowing through philosophy 25 centuries later. Every time someone says, "I might be wrong about this," every time a scientist designs an experiment to test their assumptions, every time a therapist helps someone examine their beliefs, they're channeling Socrates' dream-derived wisdom about the intelligence of admitting ignorance. So next time you're tempted to pretend you understand something you really don't, remember that the founder of Western philosophy built his entire approach on the radical idea that not knowing can be more valuable than knowing. Sometimes the wisest response to life's big questions isn't an answer, it's a better question. The legendary founder of Taoism was supposedly struggling with the question of how to live in harmony with natural forces rather than constantly fighting against them. Chinese philosophy at the time was obsessed with rules, regulations, and systematic approaches to everything, but Lao Tzu sensed that this approach was actually making life more difficult rather than easier. Picture ancient China, where Confucian scholars were busy creating elaborate protocols for every conceivable human interaction. How to bow, when to speak, what to wear, how to think, there was a rule for everything. And Lao Tzu's looking at this bureaucratic nightmare thinking, this can't be right. Nature doesn't follow rule books, yet everything works perfectly. So he's wrestling with this fundamental question: how do you create order without force? How do you lead without controlling? How do you accomplish things without struggling against the natural flow of existence? These aren't just philosophical puzzles, they're practical problems for anyone trying to live wisely in a complex world. Then one night, Lao Tzu had what might be the most elegant philosophical dream in history. He found himself as water flowing down a mountainside. Not watching water, not thinking about water actually experiencing existence as water. And this wasn't just poetic metaphor. It was a complete education in the physics of effortless effectiveness. Instead of trying to control his path or force his way through obstacles, he simply flowed around whatever was in his way. When he encountered a rock, he didn't try to move it, he found the easiest path around it. When he reached a cliff, he didn't resist falling, he became a waterfall. Every obstacle became an opportunity for graceful adaptation. But here's what made this dream revolutionary. Lao Tzu realized that the most effective action is often the action that requires the least effort. Not because you're being lazy, but because you're working with natural forces rather than against them. This became the Taoist principle of Wu-Wei, effortless action that accomplishes more by doing less. Think about it. Water is the softest substance, yet over time it carves the Grand Canyon. It never fights the rock directly, never uses force or aggression. It just persistently finds the path of least resistance, and eventually the hardest stone yields to its gentle persistence. The most powerful action is often the action that feels like no action at all. But the insight went deeper than just personal effectiveness. Lao Tzu saw that trying to control life through rules and force is like swimming upstream. It's exhausting, ineffective, and ultimately impossible. The wise approach is to understand the natural patterns and flow with them rather than fighting them. This principle revolutionized Chinese philosophy and provided a practical alternative to the rigid Confucian approach to social organization. Instead of more rules and regulations, Lao Tzu advocated for understanding and working with human nature as it naturally is, rather than trying to force it into artificial categories. The practical implications were enormous. In leadership, Wu-Wei means creating conditions where people naturally want to do what needs to be done, rather than forcing compliance through rules and punishments. In relationships, it means responding to what is actually happening rather than trying to control what should happen. In personal development, it means working with your natural tendencies and energy patterns rather than fighting against them. But here's what's really fascinating about Lao Tzu's water dream. It solved the fundamental paradox of power. How can you be strong without being rigid? How can you be effective without being aggressive? How can you lead without dominating? Water showed him the answer. True strength is flexible, true power is responsive, true leadership creates space for others to flourish. The dream also revealed something profound about the relationship between effort and results. In our achievement-obsessed culture, we tend to think that more effort equals better results. But Lao Tzu's water consciousness showed that often the opposite is true. When you're fighting against natural forces, increased effort just creates more resistance. When you're flowing with natural forces, minimal effort can produce maximum results. This isn't about being passive or giving up on goals. It's about finding the path that aligns with natural forces rather than opposing them. Like a skilled martial artist who uses an opponent's momentum against them, Wu-Wei involves redirecting existing energies rather than trying to create energy through force. What I love about this story is how it shows that the most profound philosophical insights are often the simplest ones. Lao Tzu didn't receive a complex metaphysical system or elaborate theoretical framework. He just experienced what it felt like to be water, and that simple experience contained everything he needed to understand about effective action, wise leadership, and harmonious living. The Tao Te Ching, which emerged from this dream-derived understanding, became one of the most influential texts in human history, precisely because it offers a practical alternative to the force-based approaches that dominate most human institutions. Instead of trying to control reality, you learn to dance with it. Instead of imposing your will on the world, you discover how to align your intentions with the natural flow of events. And the beauty is that you can apply this principle immediately. The next time you're struggling with a problem, instead of pushing harder, try asking, what would water do? How can I find the path of least resistance that still gets me where I want to go? How can I accomplish this goal by working with the forces that are already in motion rather than fighting against them? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing and start flowing. As Lao Tzu discovered in his dream of being water, the soft overcomes the hard, the yielding conquers the rigid, and the path of least resistance often leads to the most beautiful destinations. Heraclitus was obsessed with change and contradiction. He'd noticed that everything in existence is constantly flowing, transforming, becoming its opposite. Rivers aren't permanent things, they're temporary patterns in flowing water. Bodies aren't static objects, they're dynamic processes of cellular replacement. Even thoughts and emotions are constantly shifting and evolving. But this created a philosophical problem that was driving him absolutely nuts. If everything is always changing, how can there be any stable truth or knowledge? How can we make sense of a reality that never stays the same long enough to be understood? It's like trying to take a photograph of lightning. By the time you capture it, it's already something else entirely. Picture ancient Greece around 500 BCE, and here's this guy watching the world like it's some cosmic movie where every frame is completely different from the last. People are born, they age, they die. Seasons cycle from spring to winter and back again. Political systems rise and fall. Even the ground beneath his feet was slowly shifting and changing over geological time. Heraclitus became famous for saying things like, "No man ever steps in the same river twice," which sounds poetic until you realize he was dead serious about the philosophical implications. If everything is in constant flux, then what the hell do we actually know? How can we have any stable concepts, any reliable knowledge, any consistent identity? The guy was basically having an existential crisis about the nature of reality itself. Most people just accept that things change and get on with their lives, but Heraclitus couldn't let it go. He was like that friend who won't stop picking at a philosophical scab until it becomes a full-blown intellectual wound. In his dream, Heraclitus saw the hidden pattern that underlies all change, what he called the logos, or the rational principle that governs transformation. And this wasn't just some abstract concept he was theorizing about. In the dream, he could actually perceive the underlying structure of reality, like seeing the source code of the universe. Change isn't random or chaotic, he realized. It follows intelligible patterns that are actually beautiful when you can see them from the right perspective. Day becomes night, but night also becomes day. Youth becomes age, but age produces new youth. Conflict creates harmony, and harmony generates new conflicts. It's like a cosmic dance where every movement is both an ending and a beginning. The dream revealed that apparent opposites are actually complementary aspects of deeper patterns. You can't have up without down, hot without cold, life without death. The unity of opposites isn't a contradiction, it's the fundamental structure of reality itself. It's like how you need both positive and negative charges to create electricity, or how you need both inhalation and exhalation to breathe. Change isn't the enemy of stability, it's what stability is made of. When Heraclitus woke up, he understood something profound. You can step into the same river twice because the river's identity isn't based on containing the same water, it's based on maintaining the same pattern of flow. The river is the flowing, not the H2O molecules that happen to be flowing through it at any given moment. This insight completely revolutionized how we think about identity, permanence, and knowledge. Permanence and change aren't opposites. Permanence is what certain patterns of change look like when you zoom out far enough. Your body replaces every cell over a 7-year cycle, but you're still recognizably you because you maintain the same pattern of organization. The practical implications were enormous. If reality is fundamentally about patterns of change rather than static things, then wisdom isn't about finding eternal truths that never change, it's about understanding the principles that govern transformation. Instead of trying to hold on to things that are inevitably going to change, you learn to recognize and work with the patterns of change themselves. Heraclitus's dream-derived insight influenced pretty much every major philosopher who came after him. The idea that reality is fundamentally dynamic, that opposites are interdependent, that underlying patterns govern apparent chaos. These concepts show up in everything from Hegel's dialectics to modern systems theory to chaos mathematics. But perhaps the most profound aspect of his vision was understanding that the logos, this rational principle underlying all change, isn't separate from us. We're not outside observers trying to understand a changing world. We're patterns within the larger pattern, expressions of the same cosmic principle that governs everything else. What I find fascinating about Heraclitus' story is how it shows that some of the most revolutionary insights are hiding in plain sight. Everyone can see that things change, but it took a dream to reveal that change itself follows predictable patterns, that chaos contains hidden order, that the dance of opposites is actually the music of existence itself. The dream didn't just give him a theory, it gave him a completely different way of experiencing reality. Instead of being frustrated by constant change, he learned to see change as the creative principle of the universe. Instead of mourning the loss of permanence, he discovered that permanence was just a different way of describing certain types of change patterns. And here's what's really wild. Modern physics has basically confirmed what Heraclitus saw in his dream. At the quantum level, particles don't have fixed properties. They exist in states of constant flux, popping in and out of existence, changing their characteristics based on how they're observed. The universe really is more like a cosmic river than a collection of solid objects. Sometimes the most profound philosophical insights are the ones that seem obvious once you hear them, but required a complete shift in perspective to discover. Heraclitus' dream showed him that instead of trying to find stability in a changing world, we can find stability by understanding the patterns of change themselves. The Logos isn't something separate from the world, it is the world, experienced from the inside as the principle that makes change intelligible rather than chaotic. St. Augustine was wrestling with one of the deepest questions in philosophy and theology. What is time? And how can an eternal God create and interact with temporal creatures? If God is outside of time, how can divine actions have effects within time? And if God is within time, then how can God be eternal and unchanging? Picture this brilliant mind in the late 4th century, pacing around his study in North Africa, completely obsessed with a question that was making his brain hurt. Augustine had been studying this problem for years, reading Greek philosophy, Christian theology, and diving deep into his own psychological observations about memory and anticipation. But every approach led to contradictions and paradoxes that seemed impossible to resolve. The guy was basically having an intellectual breakdown over the nature of temporal existence. Think about it, if God is eternal and unchanging, how can God make decisions that affect events in time? If God knows the future, how can humans have free will? If the past no longer exists and the future doesn't exist yet, what exactly is the present moment? These aren't just abstract puzzles. They're fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. Augustine had tried every philosophical approach he could think of. The Greek philosophers had theories about cyclical time, eternal recurrence, and the relationship between time and eternity. Christian theologians had developed complex arguments about divine foreknowledge and human freedom, but nothing quite worked. Every solution seemed to create new problems. Every answer raised 3 more questions. The breakthrough came through what Augustine later described as either a dream or a vision. The historical sources aren't entirely clear, and honestly, the distinction might not matter. What matters is that Augustine experienced something that completely transformed his understanding of time, eternity, and the relationship between divine and human consciousness. In his dream, Augustine found himself experiencing time from what he could only describe as God's perspective, seeing past, present, and future simultaneously as a single, complete pattern. From this viewpoint, time wasn't a sequence of separate moments flowing from past to future, but more like a landscape that could be viewed all at once from sufficient height. Imagine standing on a mountaintop and looking down at a river valley. From that elevated perspective, you can see the entire course of the river simultaneously, where it starts, where it flows, where it bends, where it ends. Someone walking along the riverbank experiences the river sequentially, one step at a time, but from above, the whole pattern is visible at once. The dream showed Augustine that temporal creatures experience time sequentially because of the limitations of finite consciousness, not because time itself is actually sequential. We're like people walking along the riverbank of existence, experiencing one moment after another, but from the eternal perspective, the entire timeline of existence is present simultaneously. Time isn't something that flows, it's something that appears to flow when you experience it from inside rather than outside. But the most profound aspect of Augustine's vision was understanding how free will works within divine providence. This had been the puzzle that was driving him crazy. If God already knows what's going to happen, how can human choices be genuinely free? The dream revealed that from the eternal perspective, Human choices are completely free and completely determined simultaneously. They're free from the human perspective of living through time sequentially. When you're making a decision, you're genuinely choosing between real alternatives. But they're determined from the eternal perspective of seeing the complete pattern all at once. God doesn't force your choices, but God sees the entire timeline, including all the choices you freely make. It's like the difference between reading a book and having written the book. When you're reading, each page reveals new information and you don't know what's coming next. But if you wrote the book, you know the entire story, even though the characters in the story are making genuine choices within the narrative structure you created. This insight revolutionized Christian theology and provided a framework for understanding how human freedom and divine sovereignty can coexist without contradiction. Instead of God controlling human actions like a puppeteer, God creates the temporal framework within which genuine human choices can occur, while simultaneously knowing the eternal pattern that emerges from those free choices. The practical implications were enormous. Augustine realized that the anxiety and frustration he'd been feeling about the passage of time, the sense that the past is lost and the future is uncertain, was based on a limited perspective. From the eternal viewpoint, nothing is ever really lost because the entire timeline exists simultaneously. Your childhood, your present moment, your eventual death are all equally real and present from the perspective of eternity. This doesn't mean that temporal existence is an illusion, but rather that it's one aspect of a larger reality that transcends temporal limitations. The experience of sequential time is real and meaningful, but it's held within an eternal context that gives it ultimate significance and permanence. Augustine's dream also resolved the philosophical puzzle about what the present moment actually is. If you think about it carefully, the present moment has no duration. It's just the infinitesimal boundary between past and future. But if the present has no duration and the past no longer exists, and the future doesn't exist yet, then when exactly do we exist? The dream showed Augustine that this puzzle arises from trying to understand eternity from within temporal limitations. From the eternal perspective, all moments are equally present, equally real, equally significant. The present moment isn't a fleeting instant between non-existence, it's your unique position within the eternal pattern of existence. What I find fascinating about Augustine's story is how it demonstrates that some philosophical problems can't be solved through logical analysis alone. They require a fundamental shift in perspective that can only come through direct insight. Augustine had all the intellectual tools he needed to understand the relationship between time and eternity, but it wasn't until his dream gave him experiential access to the eternal perspective that the pieces fell into place. The dream didn't just give him a theory about time, it gave him a completely different way of experiencing temporal existence. Instead of being anxious about the passage of time, he learned to see each moment as eternally significant. Instead of mourning the loss of the past, he understood that nothing is ever really lost from the eternal perspective. Instead of being uncertain about the future, he realized that the eternal pattern includes and transcends all temporal uncertainties. Augustine's insight also laid the groundwork for later philosophical developments about the relationship between subjective experience and objective reality. The idea that the same reality can be experienced differently from different perspectives, that temporal and eternal viewpoints are both valid but limited, influenced everything from medieval mysticism to modern physics. Einstein's relativity theory, which shows that the experience of time depends on the observer's frame of reference, would have made perfect sense to Augustine. The dream had shown him that consciousness and time are intimately connected, that how you experience time depends on the perspective from which you're observing it. This insight continues to influence contemporary discussions about consciousness, time, and the nature of reality. If Augustine was right that the eternal perspective is more fundamental than the temporal perspective, then our ordinary experience of sequential time might be like a shadow cast by a higher dimensional reality that we can only glimpse in dreams, meditation, or moments of mystical insight. You know what's fascinating about all these philosophical dream stories? They reveal something profound about how human consciousness actually works, something that ancient cultures understood intuitively, but that modern science is just beginning to rediscover. Throughout history, most civilizations treated dreams as a natural source of wisdom, guidance, and insight. The idea that sleep is just downtime, when the brain randomly processes information, is actually a very recent invention. For thousands of years, humans understood that consciousness operates differently during sleep, and that this different mode of operation can access types of information that waking consciousness can't reach. Think about it. We spend roughly 8 hours every single night in these altered states of consciousness. Yet our culture treats it like we're just offline. But what if that's completely backwards? What if the dreaming mind is actually when we're most online connected to sources of information and insight that our rational, filtering, skeptical waking mind would never allow through the door? The ancient Greeks had a sophisticated understanding of what they called divine dreams, visions that provided genuine insight rather than just psychological processing. They weren't just throwing around mystical language here. They had developed systematic methods for distinguishing between different types of dreams based on their source and reliability. They created elaborate techniques for cultivating prophetic and wisdom-bearing dreams, treating dream work like a legitimate technology for expanding human knowledge. The famous oracle at Delphi used dream incubation as one of her primary methods for accessing divine knowledge. But here's what's interesting: modern analysis of the oracle's chamber shows. It was built over geological fissures that released ethylene gas, a substance that induces altered states of consciousness. The Greeks weren't just being superstitious. They were using environmental chemistry to enhance their dream states in ways that modern neuroscience would recognize as scientifically sound. Similarly, ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, and Chinese cultures all had systematic approaches to dream wisdom. The Egyptians had professional dream interpreters who worked alongside physicians and government advisors. These weren't fortune tellers at carnivals. They were highly educated specialists who understood that certain mental states during sleep could provide access to information about natural patterns, future events, and solutions to complex problems. Ancient wisdom traditions understood something about consciousness that modern materialism has forgotten: that awareness isn't produced by the brain but channeled through it. The Chinese developed the most sophisticated dream cultivation practices, with detailed manuals explaining how to prepare the mind and body for wisdom-bearing dreams. Taoist practitioners would spend years learning to maintain consciousness during sleep states, believing that the dreaming mind could access what they called the Tao, the fundamental pattern underlying all existence. Even more intriguing, many ancient cultures reported shared dreaming experiences, multiple people having the same or similar dreams simultaneously, often across great distances. These weren't isolated incidents, but documented phenomena that were taken seriously by scholars and rulers, who based important decisions on collective dream intelligence. Modern neuroscience is starting to validate some of these ancient insights, though from a completely different theoretical framework. Research on REM sleep shows that the dreaming brain engages in types of information processing that are literally impossible during waking consciousness. The default mode network becomes hyperactive, creating novel connections between brain regions that normally don't communicate directly. During REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reality checking and logical analysis, goes partially offline. This allows for non-linear, associative thinking that can solve problems through insight rather than step-by-step logic. It's like temporarily removing the skeptical editor in your head so that wild, creative connections can emerge without being immediately shot down as impossible. Studies of creative problem-solving consistently show that people are more likely to have breakthrough insights after sleeping on a problem rather than continuing to work on it consciously. The dreaming mind seems particularly good at finding unexpected connections, recognizing hidden patterns, and integrating information in ways that transcend the normal boundaries of logical thinking. There's also fascinating research on what's called hyperconnectivity during certain phases of sleep. Brain imaging shows that during deep REM states, regions that normally operate independently begin forming temporary networks. The visual cortex starts talking to the language centers, Emotional processing areas connect with mathematical reasoning, memory storage links up with creative imagination. This might explain why philosophical insights often feel like they're coming from somewhere else. They're emerging from novel neural networks that only exist during altered states of consciousness. Your dreaming brain is literally making connections that your waking brain can't make, accessing combinations of knowledge and understanding that conscious thought would never stumble upon. But perhaps the most intriguing area of research involves what scientists call non-local consciousness, the possibility that awareness can access information beyond the normal boundaries of individual brains. While this remains controversial in mainstream neuroscience, there's a growing body of research suggesting that consciousness might not be entirely produced by individual neural activity. Studies of remote viewing, telepathic dreams, and collective unconscious phenomena consistently produce results that are statistically significant but difficult to explain using conventional models of how consciousness works. Some researchers are beginning to explore the possibility that individual brains might be more like radio receivers than generators, tuning into aspects of a larger field of consciousness rather than creating consciousness from scratch. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious is looking increasingly plausible as neuroscience discovers universal patterns in human psychology and behavior. We all seem to share certain archetypal templates, symbolic associations, and emotional responses that transcend cultural conditioning. This suggests that there might be aspects of consciousness that exist independently of individual brains, exactly what ancient wisdom traditions have been teaching for millennia. The philosophical implications are staggering. If consciousness isn't entirely produced by individual brains, then the sharp boundary between self and other becomes questionable. If awareness can access information beyond the normal limits of sensory experience, then the boundary between subjective and objective reality becomes blurry. And if sleeping consciousness can access different types of information than waking consciousness, then we might be drastically underutilizing our potential for wisdom and insight. What we call mystical experiences might just be normal human capabilities that we've forgotten how to use. Ancient philosophers understood that different states of consciousness provide access to different types of knowledge. Rational, analytical thinking is excellent for certain types of problems, but it's limited by the assumptions and categories it operates within. It can only work with information that's already available to conscious awareness, using logical processes that follow predictable patterns. Dreaming consciousness, by contrast, can transcend these limitations and access insights that logic alone can't reach. It operates through metaphor, symbol, and direct intuitive understanding rather than step-by-step reasoning. It can make leaps of understanding that skip over intermediate logical steps, arriving at conclusions that turn out to be correct even though the rational mind can't initially understand why. This is why so many philosophical breakthroughs happen during dreams, meditation, or other altered states. It's not that these states make you irrational, it's that they make you super-rational, capable of types of understanding that transcend the boundaries of normal logical thinking. The practical implications are significant. If you're struggling with a complex problem, whether philosophical, creative, or practical, you might be more likely to find a solution by sleeping on it than by thinking harder. This doesn't mean abandoning rational analysis, but rather recognizing that rational analysis works best when combined with intuitive insight. Modern education and culture heavily emphasize analytical, logical thinking, while largely ignoring the cultivation of intuitive wisdom. We've created a civilization that's incredibly good at breaking problems down into smaller pieces and analyzing them systematically, but we've lost touch with the holistic, pattern-recognizing capabilities of consciousness that can see the forest as well as the trees. But if the great philosophers are any indication, the most profound insights come from learning to access and integrate both types of consciousness, the rational mind that can evaluate and organize insights, and the intuitive mind that can generate insights that transcend normal logical limitations. Some contemporary researchers are beginning to explore practical techniques for cultivating wisdom-bearing dreams. These range from simple practices like keeping dream journals and setting intentions before sleep, to more elaborate approaches involving meditation, specific dietary practices, and environmental modifications that enhance the likelihood of meaningful dreams. The key insight from both ancient wisdom traditions and modern research is that consciousness is far more flexible and capable than most people realize. We're not limited to the types of awareness we experience during normal waking consciousness. By learning to access and work with different states of awareness, we can dramatically expand our capacity for insight, creativity, and wisdom. The great philosophical discoveries weren't accidents. They were the result of minds that had learned to operate beyond the normal boundaries of rational thought. What's really exciting is that we're living at a moment when ancient wisdom and modern science are starting to converge around a deeper understanding of consciousness and its possibilities. We have technologies now that can monitor brain states in real time, allowing us to study the precise neural correlates of different types of awareness. We can potentially develop new techniques for enhancing the wisdom-bearing aspects of sleep, while maintaining the rigor of scientific investigation. The future of philosophy might not happen in universities or lecture halls, but in the liminal spaces between waking and sleeping, where consciousness reveals its deepest secrets to minds that have learned to listen with the kind of humble curiosity that Socrates discovered in his conversation with his own ignorance. Before we drift off completely tonight, let me share a few lesser-known stories about philosophical dreams that most people have never heard of. These are the cases that exist in footnotes, buried in ancient manuscripts, whispered about in academic circles but never quite making it into the mainstream history of philosophy. Fact 1. The Dream Academy of ancient Rome in the 2nd century CE. There was a philosophical in Rome called the Somnium Academia, literally, the Dream Academy. And this wasn't some fringe mystical cult. This was a legitimate philosophical institution that attracted students from across the Roman Empire, including the sons and daughters of senators and wealthy merchants who were willing to pay enormous sums for what they believed was the most advanced form of education available. The academy was founded by a philosopher named Marcus Aurelius Oneros. That's dream in Greek, who had studied under the Stoics but became convinced that rational waking thought could only take you so far. He believed that the most profound philosophical insights could only be accessed through systematic dream cultivation, treating sleep as a technology for expanding human consciousness rather than just biological necessity. Picture this: students would undergo months of preparation involving specific diets designed to enhance dream recall and intensity. They'd eat certain combinations of herbs and foods that we now know affect neurotransmitter production. They practiced elaborate meditation techniques borrowed from Egyptian mystery schools and Persian magi. And they slept in specially designed chambers that used acoustic properties, specific lighting, and even primitive aromatherapy to enhance the likelihood of meaningful dreams. But here's what made this place truly extraordinary. Students would pose specific philosophical questions before sleep and then attempt to receive answers through their dreams. Not vague symbolic imagery, but detailed philosophical arguments, logical proofs, ethical frameworks, complete intellectual systems delivered through unconscious experience. The Academy kept meticulous records of over 3,000 philosophical dreams, cataloged by topic, analyzed for consistency, and cross-referenced for accuracy. Many of these dream-derived insights went on to influence later Roman philosophy and early Christian theology in ways that scholars are still discovering today. The most famous graduate was a woman named Julia Sophia, and yes, a woman in a Roman philosophical school was almost unheard of, but her dream abilities were so extraordinary that even the patriarchal Roman system couldn't ignore them. She reportedly received a complete ethical system through a series of dreams about living in a city, where everyone's thoughts and intentions were completely visible to everyone else. Imagine that for a moment, a society where mental privacy doesn't exist, where every thought, every intention, every emotion is transparent to your neighbors. Julia's dream city forced her to work out the implications. How do you maintain dignity when nothing is hidden? How do you practice virtue when hypocrisy is impossible? What does authentic morality look like when pretense can't exist? Her resulting philosophy of transparent virtue influenced early, Christian monasticism and can still be found echoing through some contemporary ethical theories. The idea that true morality must be the same in public and private. That virtue practiced for appearance's sake isn't virtue at all. These insights came from dreams about an impossible city that revealed truths about human nature. Fact 2. Zhuangzi's butterfly paradox. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi had what might be the most famous philosophical dream in history, though most people only know the surface of the story. He dreamed he was a butterfly, flitting freely through gardens, completely content in his butterfly existence. When he woke up, he faced a question that still puzzles philosophers today. Was he Zhuangzi who had dreamed of being a butterfly? Or was he a butterfly now dreaming of being Zhuangzi? But here's what most people don't realize about this story. Zhuangzi wasn't just telling a Q paradox. He was using this dream to develop a sophisticated theory about the relativity of identity and the fluid nature of consciousness that was centuries ahead of its time. Think about what he was really asking. If your experience of being a butterfly felt completely real and authentic, and your current experience of being human feels completely real and authentic, then what makes one more real than the other? What if identity isn't a fixed thing but a temporary pattern of experience? What if the boundary between self and other, between one state of being and another, is far more permeable than we normally assume? Zhuangzi suggested that what we call reality might just be one particularly persistent dream, and that the boundaries between different states of consciousness are far more fluid than we want to admit. He was essentially proposing that the sense of having a stable, continuous identity is itself a kind of useful illusion. Modern researchers studying lucid dreaming and consciousness have found that Zhuangzi's butterfly paradox points to real questions about the nature of self-awareness and the construction of personal identity. When people have vivid lucid dreams or out-of-body experiences, they often report exactly the kind of confusion Zhuangzi described. Difficulty determining which state of consciousness is more real or fundamental. Even more intriguingly, neuroscience is discovering that the sense of having a unified, continuous self is actually constructed moment by the brain. The you that exists right now is different from the you that existed a few seconds ago, even though memory creates the illusion of continuity. Zhuangzi's butterfly dream was pointing toward this insight over 2,000 years, before we had the scientific tools to investigate it. Fact 3. The prophetic dreams of medieval scholars during the medieval period. Many of the greatest philosophical works were reportedly inspired by prophetic dreams. But what's really fascinating is how systematic and widespread this phenomenon was. It wasn't just a few isolated cases, it was almost an expected part of serious intellectual work. Thomas Aquinas, probably the most influential Christian philosopher in history, claimed that his massive Summa Theologica, which attempted to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, was outlined to him in a series of dreams by angels. But these weren't vague, mystical visions. According to his own accounts, the angels provided detailed logical arguments, specific organizational structures, and solutions to complex theological problems that Aquinas had been struggling with for years. Duns Scotus, another major medieval philosopher, reported that his theory of individuation, basically what makes each individual thing uniquely itself, came to him in a dream where he found himself simultaneously conversing with Plato and Aristotle. In the dream, these ancient philosophers presented their opposing views about the nature of reality, and Scotus was able to synthesize their insights into his own unique theory. But here's what's really mind-bending. Several medieval philosophers reported having shared dreams experiencing the same philosophical insights in dreams that occurred on the same nights, despite being in different monasteries, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. These accounts were carefully documented by monastery scribes who took detailed notes about dates, times, and the specific content of the dreams. One particularly well-documented case involved 3 Franciscan scholars in different parts of Europe who all dreamed about the same solution to a complex problem about the relationship between divine foreknowledge and human free will. They had never met each other, had no way of communicating, yet they all woke up with essentially identical philosophical arguments that resolved a contradiction that had been puzzling theologians for centuries. Modern skeptics might dismiss these accounts as coincidence or exaggeration, but the documentation is remarkably detailed and consistent. The monastery scribes who recorded these dreams had no reason to fabricate stories in fact. They were often skeptical themselves and only documented what they considered to be genuinely inexplicable phenomena. What makes these medieval cases particularly intriguing is that they hint at what Jung would later call the collective unconscious, a shared, psychological realm that connects all human minds across space and time. The idea that profound insights might be accessible through dreams to anyone who learns to tune into the right frequency of consciousness. Fact 4. The dream philosophers of ancient India, one tradition that rarely makes it into Western philosophy textbooks is the dream cultivation practices of ancient Indian philosophers, particularly the Advaitin sages who developed incredibly sophisticated techniques for using dreams as a path to enlightenment. These philosophers understood that most people experience three distinct states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But they claimed there was a fourth state called Turiya that could be accessed by maintaining awareness during all three normal states. The dream state was considered a crucial laboratory for exploring the nature of consciousness, because it revealed how the mind creates seemingly real experiences from pure mental activity. Ancient Indian texts describe elaborate practices for lucid dreaming that were far more advanced than anything being researched in modern sleep labs. Practitioners would train for years to maintain continuous awareness during sleep, allowing them to explore the nature of consciousness with scientific precision. But here's what's really remarkable. These ancient dream explorers came to conclusions about consciousness that are just now being confirmed by neuroscience. They understood that the sense of having a separate self is constructed by mental activity, that the boundary between subject and object is created by perception rather than being inherent in reality, and that consciousness might be fundamental to the universe rather than just an emergent property of complex brains. Fact 5. The secret dream societies of Renaissance Europe during the Renaissance. There were several secret societies that used shared dreaming as a method for advancing human knowledge. These groups, often connected to alchemical traditions, believed that certain truths could only be accessed through collective unconscious experience. The most documented of these societies was the Fraternitas Somniorum, or Brotherhood of Dreams, which operated in Florence during the late 15th century. Members would gather for elaborate rituals designed to synchronize their dream states, allowing them to explore philosophical questions collectively through shared unconscious experience. Leonardo da Vinci was rumored to have been connected to one of these societies, though the evidence is fragmentary. Some scholars suggest that his famous mirror writing and bizarre inventions might have been inspired by dream experiences that gave him access to knowledge that seemed impossible for his time period. The larger pattern, what's striking about all these obscure cases is how they point to a consistent pattern throughout human history, the recognition that consciousness operates differently during sleep, and that this different mode of operation might provide access to types of knowledge that waking thought can't reach. Sometimes I think about all the philosophical insights that are probably floating around in our collective unconscious right now, waiting for the right dreaming mind to discover them. What solutions to contemporary problems might be accessible through dreams? What understanding about consciousness, reality, and human nature might be available to us if we learn to dream with intention and wisdom? There's something beautifully mysterious about the fact that our most profound insights often come to us when we're not even trying to think. It suggests that wisdom isn't something we create through effort. It's something we discover by learning to get out of our own way and allow deeper levels of consciousness to emerge. The ancient philosophers understood something that our culture has largely forgotten: that the dreaming mind isn't just randomly processing the day's events, but is actively exploring realms of possibility that conscious thought would never venture into. They treated dreams as a legitimate source of knowledge, a natural technology for expanding human understanding. The greatest philosophical truths aren't invented, they're remembered by minds that have learned to listen to the wisdom that flows through them when they stop trying so hard to be wise. And maybe that's the most important insight of all. That wisdom isn't about accumulating more information or thinking harder about problems, but about learning to access states of consciousness where understanding arises naturally, effortlessly, like water flowing downhill toward its destination. Sweet dreams, fellow philosophers. May your sleeping mind discover truths that your waking mind never knew it was looking for. If you're somehow still awake at this point, which honestly would surprise me, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with meaningful dreams. Have you ever had a dream that gave you insight into a problem you'd been wrestling with? Have you ever woken up with an understanding that felt like it came from somewhere beyond your normal thinking? You know, after spending tonight diving deep into all these stories about philosophers who literally dreamed their way to revolutionary insights, I can't help but wonder what profound truths might be floating around in your sleeping mind right now, just waiting for the right moment to surface. Maybe that recurring dream you keep having isn't just random neural static. Maybe it's your unconscious mind trying to tell you something important about the nature of reality, consciousness, or your place in this mysterious universe we all share. Leave a comment below and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe share a philosophical question you've been pondering, who knows. Maybe your sleeping mind will work on it and surprise you with an answer when you wake up. I always love hearing from our global community of night owls, insomniacs, and deep thinkers checking in from every corner of the world. Don't forget to subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these explorations of how consciousness works in ways we're still trying to understand. We'll be back next week with another journey into the mysterious territories where sleep and wisdom intersect, where ancient knowledge meets cutting-edge science, where the impossible becomes inevitable in the liminal space between waking and dreaming. Sleep well tonight, and remember, your dreaming mind might be working on problems and insights that your waking mind hasn't even discovered yet. The philosophers we talked about tonight, Descartes, Jung, Spinoza, Leibniz, all of them, they weren't special or different from you. They just learned to pay attention to the wisdom that flows through consciousness when we stop trying so hard to be conscious. When we let go of the need to control and analyze and simply allow deeper levels of awareness to emerge. Maybe tonight, as you drift off into sleep, your unconscious mind will access those same universal patterns that Jung discovered, or tune into that collective wisdom that ancient dream academies cultivated, or receive those sudden insights that feel like gifts from somewhere beyond ordinary thought. Sweet dreams, fellow philosophers. May your sleeping mind discover truths that your waking mind never knew it was looking for. May you dream deeply, rest peacefully, and wake up tomorrow with new understanding about the profound mystery of being conscious in this strange and beautiful universe. See you in your dreams.